Hi everyone, welcome to the 7th episode of the Data Protectors podcast. My name is Meshach Masibu and I'll be your host for today. The goal of this podcast series is to offer guidance to small and medium-sized enterprises on how to comply with the Kenya Data Protection Act 2019. For the past 6 episodes, we've been looking at the current issues that are touching on data protection, such as data protection principles, the cost of compliance, cross-border data transfers, and how to engage with data protection authorities. Last week, we had an interesting discussion on what experts foresee the future of data protection will look like and the insights that revolve around that. Today's conversation will focus on the role of academia and research institutions and how they advance data protection. Academic and research institutions have played a crucial role in publishing evidence-based research on critical data protection issues, as well as training data protection champions the world over. In this episode, we shine a spotlight on key publications and courses that small and medium-sized enterprises can enroll in to build their understanding of data protection, as well as to boost their data protection compliance from an academic point of view. This episode will explore what challenges academia faces in advancing data compliance, what kind of support they might need, and how data protection compliance can be improved from an academic point of view. But before we get into this exciting episode, let's have a look at the partners behind this podcast. Have you heard of the African Union European Union Digital for Development Hub? In a nutshell, it is a project that aims to increase cooperation in the digital field between Africa and Europe, and it is implemented by 8 partner organizations including JZ, the German Development Agency, and Kictanet. Did you know that our Data Protection Act in Kenya was inspired by the European one, which is called the GDPR? Therefore, data protection is an exciting and promising field for Africa and Europe to collaborate on, and this is how this podcast came to life. We'll share more information about the EU D4D Hub project and the partners as we go along, but let's start hearing from our guests. For this episode, I'm excited to introduce our guest moderator, Sumaiyah Omar, and our 2 speakers, Patricia Boshe and Grace Mutung'u. They'll serve as our guides for this episode.
Welcome to the show, everyone. My name is Sumaiyah Omar, and I'll be moderating this session today. I am an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I'm also a data protection officer at the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, known as the ODPC. I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship and SMEs and, young civil society organizations. And on my free time, I'm part of I mentor startups, basically at the Founders Institute. And the only experience I have in academia is being a career student. So I recently graduated from the Kictanet Fellowship, known as the Kenya School of Internet Governance. I'm happy to be here today. I think I'll have the audience, the speakers, Patricia and Grace, introduce themselves.
I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Patricia, as Sumaiyah already told you. I'm an advocate of High Court in Tanzania, but currently I work in Germany at the University of Passau as a lecturer, but also as a senior researcher at a project center for law and digitalization at the same University of Passau. And I'm very happy to be here today in this podcast.
Grace, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, everyone, and hello. My name is Grace Mutung'u. I work as a researcher on digital issues in Africa. I've been doing this for the past 10 or so years when digital was still called ICT. I have an interest in digital rights, data protection, digital ID, and everything in between.
Thank you, guys, for the wonderful introduction. I'll start with Patricia. So, Patricia, you're a scholar par excellence. What are your general thoughts on how academia can be used to enhance data protection compliance for SMEs?
I believe to be able to enhance data protection or to help the SMEs to comply with data protection, we need collaborative research with, for example, grassroots advocates like Grace. Academia and those working with the SMEs know if they collaborate, they'll know the best approach on how to come up with sort of guidelines or recommendations on how SMEs can comply with the data protection. Actually, there is already in the EU for example, guidelines by the EU Agency for Cybersecurity or the European Union Data Protection Board, they already established some guidelines on how SMEs can comply with data protection. So something like that can be done in Africa. But in my opinion, I think academia would be best suited if they collaborate with people working from the ground to be able to know or to bring guidelines that speak on what is really in practice.
Thank you, Patricia. I really agree with that. I think it's really important to have like a multi-stakeholder approach when it comes to collaborative research and ensure that those recommendations come from both a practical and an academic perspective. So thank you so much for that. Grace, you have a rich background in research, and you mentioned you work with grassroots advocacy organizations, right? So I'd just like to know what your general thoughts are specifically on how academia can provide an enabling environment and rather an enabling environment of data protection for SMEs. And then, yeah, what do you think about that?
I do agree with what Patricia has said about collaboration because data protection is such a new field and there are so many emerging issues. So, for example, when the Data Protection Act in Kenya came into place, you find that it is the compliance journey for a small and medium enterprise would not be the same as a bigger enterprise or a big NGO because of the nuances involved and the cost of compliance. And so it is very important to have that collaboration with academia because SMEs can give their experiences as they are facing them in the field, and academia can translate this into actionable policy point for policymakers like government and so on.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Grace. I agree that compliance journey is not the same for all organizations, and I think that is a very important point towards enabling data protection for SMEs. I'll quickly move back to Patricia. So both you and Grace have taught a number of courses on data protection, right? And we just want to give our audience like practical examples and practical tips to take home today. And that would include what courses would you actually recommend to small and medium sized enterprises? And then for those courses, who do you recommend to take? Like, for example, do you recommend the managers to do them? Do you recommend the data protection officers to do them, the ICT team? Just practically, like, what do you like our audience to take away from today?
So first of all, there are quite a number of courses being offered by different universities and civil society organizations. Many of the times, these courses are general. They don't necessarily have them structured for SMEs. This is partly because data protection is quite new. I would give a few examples. There is a course by the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. You do not need to go to Pretoria, it's online. There's also a course by the Kenya ICT Action Network. People call it KESIG because it happens around internet governance issues. Strathmore University, the Center for IP and IT Law, also has a course, and all these courses are online. And to the question of who should be attending, I would say that, first of all, it's important for the business owner, be they a sole proprietor or a partner, whoever makes decisions, it's important for them to attend these courses and just understand what is data protection and what are they required to do. And then anybody who deals with data, I know in a lot of SMEs, the admin person is also the finance person, is also the HR person. That person just needs a basic understanding of data protection and what it means for the organization. So whoever is working with data and the business owner, they need to get this understanding.
Okay, Patricia?
Yeah, like Grace said already, there are a lot of courses that are offered free. The ones that Grace mentioned, the one from the Center for Human Rights in Pretoria University, the MOOC course is free. Anyone can register and take part in this course. It offers the basic understanding, and actually they provide contextual data protection knowledge in terms of African, what is happening in Africa. And the one from Strathmore is more, I would say, more practical, provide more practical aspect in compliance. So it depends on who is taking what. For example, just in a company, general or normal employees could take the course from Pretoria, which provide basic principle, provides on how data should be dealt with. And those who deal with data, specific with data, could look into the course that is offered by Strathmore, which provide practical aspects in compliance. But I'll say that basically, I believe that everybody working in a company needs to have an understanding, at least basic understanding on how data should be protected, should be dealt with. And this comes into implementing data protection by design and default. Once everybody knows what should be done with data, what should not be done with data, this creates this, let's say, value and tradition or custom in the company of protecting personal data, which becomes like a norm, and it simplifies the protection process. So that would be what I believe in.
Thank you for that, Patricia. I agree that there's need to ensure that the whole culture in a startup and an either as SME or a civil society young company is toward data protection, and just to make sure all employees are on board. And I also agree with what Grace said. Anyone who is making any decision at any level needs to understand the intersection between data protection and their current business. And just before we close this practical segment, do you each have at least one holy grail document or like an easy to read publication that you definitely recommend for startups? I think I'll start with Grace.
Okay, at the risk of blowing my own trumpet, when I was working at CPITS, we developed a document on data protection impact assessment for small and medium enterprises that just basically takes these organizations through a step-by-step practical on how to comply, how to figure out what data they have, and how to figure out the grounds that they're using to process that data, and how to comply with the Data Protection Act. It's actually also available on YouTube as short videos that are easy to follow.
Yeah. Please blow your trumpet. Yes. What about you, Patricia?
I also don't have a specific book that I would recommend for SMEs, but I believe these courses, for example, the one from Pretoria and Strathmore University, are available online, and they provide basically the basic approach to data protection and security measures for processing of personal information. I believe those are sufficient to begin with, to provide for the basis understanding.
Thank you, Patricia. I think I'd also recommend there's a website called Vasiligal, which is a startup based law firm based in Nigeria and the US, and they have a whole website that has resources for SMEs who are based anywhere in the world that talks about how you can look into incorporation, data protection, compliance, IP, all that. So I think I would recommend that. And also, just as we close the whole courses on data protection and practical tips for our audience today, at the Data Protection Commission, the ODPC, we've been working on an awareness campaign throughout the country, and we've been going to different counties and sensitizing everyone basically on data protection. And during our county awareness, we've actually realized that a lot of more young SMEs, young businesses, governments are really interested in terms of understanding data protection generally, and key issues as to how to register, how to comply, how to do their DPIAs, which are data protection impact assessments. So I think there'll also be more on that end. So please watch out for that on our social media and look out for those training opportunities. I think that'd be really helpful. So I think we'll move to our next segment. And in this segment, we'll just try to look at basically think tanks and research organizations and look at the nexus between the work they do and the right to privacy. So I'll start with Greece. What do you think are the main challenges that think tanks and research-based organizations face in terms of advancing the right to privacy? And how do you think they can overcome these challenges?
I think the first thing is just that there has been a law for a long time. For example, here in Kenya, a lot of research organizations were supporting advocacy organizations to advocate for a data protection law. And I think people took a breather in 2019 when the law was finally enacted. And so there has been a sort of a gap because there hasn't been too much monitoring of how the law is being implemented in practice. Remember, this is a law that was, that really followed a different model from a different jurisdiction. And so there's a lot of adaptation that needs to take place. So I think this is one of the gaps that everyone now has to catch up with and find how to fill in those gaps that are created by moving from the law on paper to the law in practice.
Mm. I agree, Grace. I think it's now time for think tanks and research organizations to look at how is the law being implemented, and then suggest how they think it should be implemented from a civil society point of view. And I'll turn to you, Patricia. Have you faced similar challenges based in Europe, and what do you think are the role that think tanks and academic institutions play there in advancing the right to privacy? And then what do you think are the takeaways you can learn and adopt back home?
Here in Europe, the awareness is much more, I would say, people are more aware of their rights, especially data protection, their rights to privacy. And so in terms of awareness, it's not, the requirement is there, but it's not as huge as in Africa, in our countries in Africa. And this you will see, for example, these trainings are offered from the primary schools. Kids in schools are taught how to protect their privacy, what to share, what not to share, what to post on social media. So when they grow up, this is like a culture, something that is known, is engraved on them. And for me, I think for us in Africa, this is something that we can take on, teaching these aspects from schools, from primary schools. It should not be a specific or a special course that anyone will have to take after, let's say, graduating from university. This should be part of curriculum so that people are growing up knowing that this is it's a norm, it's a culture, it's something that we do. It's not something that is learned as a specialized training for specific industry or for specific people, but it's something that we live in and something that we have to practice and experience in our society. So that is what I think.
Thank you for that, Patricia. I agree. There's need to have more awareness and ensure that everyone at every stage understands what data protection means and what the right to privacy entails. I think I'll go to Grace. Are you conducting any new research, and what is your current, field of interest, and would you like us to know about it? Yeah, give us a bit of spoilers.
Spoilers.
Yeah.
I am currently looking at quote unquote public data or data that is held by public agencies. I think for a lot of people in Kenya, they would think about things like Huduma number, all the data in NHIF or the data with NTSA. This is health, the National Health Agency or the transport agency that issues people with driving licenses and other transport licenses. So I think this is a very interesting area because it comes with different compliance challenges because government has different grounds for processing data, and a lot of times there's no space for consent or to ask people to come and consent. The government already has the data, and so the research is looking at how do we ensure that there are also high standards of data protection even with this data that is already with these agencies, and what can we learn from other countries that have already done this, and what does the future of such data entail?
Oh, wow, that seems really interesting, Grace. I can't wait to read that. What about you, Patricia? Are you conducting any new research? And would you like us to have some spoilers on that also?
Not a new research per se, but I'm working on a book that is a result of a conference that was conducted last year in Ghana. It's a conference that was trying to explore the landscape, data protection landscape in Africa. What is there? What is expected? What can be done to be able to have this law adapted into local context? So a book from the proceeding is coming this year, so in August or September. But research, what I've sort of I'm dwelling into now is cognitive liberty when it comes to data protection and privacy. It's sort of a new aspect that is emerging from, they say, a surveillance of a brain. So now there's a move into protecting brain from privacy encroaching activities such as profiling, tracking browsing habits, speech synthesis, and things like that. So that is something that I'm trying to look into at the moment.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting, Patricia. I hope we'll receive a signed copy of your book once it's out. And just maybe to close out, I can get like a, closing remark from both our speakers. What is your takeaway home? What do you think SMEs and civil society organizations should look out for in terms of data protection? I think I'll start with Grace.
I would say that it's a new area, and I know for sure it comes with a compliance burden. But I would also say that it's an area that could also be creating new business lines and even new businesses, because there are SMEs that have now gotten into the business of helping other SMEs comply with the Data Protection Act. And lastly, I would also say that there is a role for collective organizations, be they, collectives of SME businesses or professional organizations, in helping their members to comply with the Data Protection Act, to understand the Data Protection Act, and to also influence how the Data Protection Act will turn out in future. And so for the leaders of those collective organizations, this is an area that they should really be engaging in.
Yeah, thank you for that, Grace. Patricia?
For me, I believe SMEs need to, beyond the training and understanding on how data protection works and how one should comply, I believe there's a need to work together, collaboration between SMEs, because one company can, exchange of skills from between and within companies. That, I believe, will also support the growth of this of data protection privacy culture in companies, in SMEs, but it will also support the learning process, will also support the compliance process, will also give the SMEs confidence they need in complying with data protection and implementing security measure on that behalf.
Thank you for that, Patricia. I think for me, my biggest takeaway from this really nice podcast today has been basically understanding that there's need for the collaborative research in academia and ensuring that all the voices are heard. I think for me, it's important to also mention that regulators also can play, a very important role when it comes to academia if they work together, right? And then I think it's also one of the important things that I've learned is that compliance is not a journey that is the same for everyone. So small SMEs, small civil society organizations, and the large ones will always have different compliance journeys. So it's very important for SMEs to reach out to whether it's, as Grace mentioned, collectives, that are helping their members to comply, or if it's the regulator, or if it's, people that are training, right? So just reaching out for that knowledge and making sure they get it. And also just seeing how academia is enabling data protection, in the sense that there's so many publications that we've mentioned here today, some written by our speakers, and different courses out there for SMEs to learn from. So I think that was a very insightful session. I'll take it back to Meshach to close for us. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sumaya. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Dr. Patricia. So thank you, Patricia. Yeah, thank you so much for your time, for your insights, for just giving us all that you've given us today. So that brings us to the end of our show. So I'll just bit about the podcast again. The Data Protectors podcast is produced by the D4D Hub in collaboration with Kiktanet and JZ Kenya. And it's meant to promote the exchanges of knowledge between Kenya and European nations. And that's the whole core essence of the podcast. And if you want to see more or rather hear more about the podcast, you can follow the AU-EU D4D Hub on Twitter. Also, you can follow Kiktanet and on the DTC on Twitter and all the different social media platforms. You can also contact us and make comments and suggestions on the podcast as you listen to them. Don't forget again, for iteration, that all the podcasts and series are available on the D4D Access website as well as the Kiktanet YouTube page. D4D Access is an online platform powered by the AU-EU D4D Hub, which aims to promote exchanges of knowledge and expertise between African and European digital stakeholders. Feel free to visit their website at www.d4daccess.eu. Thank you so much for listening and see you next time.